All right. I'm Ken Reed. I'm president of Heartland Renewable Energy Society, or HRES for people who like the acronym. And we're going to talk today, not me, but Dan Chiras. I get to introduce him. He has authored many books. We're going to talk today about this particular book, The Chinese Greenhouse. And this happens to be Dan's 38th book in a series. He actually has a couple more books in the pipeline. And he's going to talk about a couple of his other books, maybe even 3 or 4 at the end of his presentation today that he has available right now for sale. And a lot of his books, probably the vast majority, are either about clean energy, sustainability, green, natural home building, things like that. He's been very much, since for a long, long time, an advocate for this kind of thing. He's spoken at many conferences. He's a regular whenever they have the group that. Pardon me?
Mother Earth
News. He's a staple. He's a regular at Mother Earth News. And I'm sorry the name escaped me because anyway, Mother Earth News used to have fairs all over, and I think that's coming back once we get past this COVID thing, if we do. Anyway, right now we get to do the virtual workshops. So without going into too much more detail, I will tell you that Dan lives on a sustainable green farm in Gerald, Missouri, where he's going to present from. And he has, right now, he has quite a bit of cattle, chickens. He did have ducks. And if you want to ask at the end what else is on his farm and what he's doing, but the primary thing he has on his farm is, again, I'll show it one more time, he's built a Chinese greenhouse, and he'll explain what that's all about. So without any further ado, I'd like to present Mr. Dan Chiras, Dr. Dan Chiras.
Let me just help people understand how we're going to proceed today. We're going to take questions at the end of the presentation. If you've got something that you've just got to know the answer to right now, like he called something blue and it was actually yellow, put it in the chat. And if it rises to the occasion, and I'll ask Dan myself, and he will give your answer. But otherwise, we're going to wait till the end for the questions. So Dan's going to share his screen, and then most of our views will go away. And there we go. So Dan, take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's so good to be with you today. I love speaking to and with folks who are enamored of solar as I am, and it's just always a pleasure. And it's always heartening to me among people who care and who are making a difference. And what I want to talk about today is, as Ken mentioned, my most recent book. I got a new one coming out real soon called Beets in Your Bedroom. It's about indoor hydroponic growing. But this book is about the Chinese greenhouse, something I learned about 4 or 5 years ago. I do want to mention that I self-published this book for many years, and then when I felt like I really knew what I was talking totally and had experience with it, then I went to the publisher and we put out this lovely 4-color book. It's full of great pictures. I also have another one if you're interested in building one. This is a self-published book. It's a photo documentary of the building of ours. It goes through every stage from the excavation of the site to the building of the rammed earth tire walls, the framing, every aspect of the whole construction. What we did in pictures and fewer words, it's mostly pictures, but some descriptions, and what we did, what we do differently, what we didn't like. And if I were to, that famous thing when you get done with a project, if I were to do it again, how would I do it? So if anybody's interested in that, I've got copies of that available too. And it's normally $27, but we'll have a Kmart blue light special today for anybody who's interested. We'll sell it for $20. So plus some shipping, I think $3 or $4 shipping. I don't know what shipping's running these days. So here's where we're going today. First of all, when you get done today, you're going to know what a Chinese greenhouse is. And no, you can't get COVID from it. Okay, just keep that in mind. What is a Chinese greenhouse? And then I want to talk to you about what makes it different from a conventional greenhouse. Okay, so we're going to focus on things that you really don't deal with ordinary greenhouses, like insulation. Most greenhouses we don't insulate, thermal mass, how you orient the greenhouse for maximum performance. And a big issue that I found is how do you keep that structure cool in the summer? And we've tried a whole bunch of things. We've been experimenting with half a dozen different ways to keep it cool. And I'll explain the rationale for that. What's the proper glazing angle? In other words, what's the angle that your glass or your plastic should be at for optimum solar gain? And then I want to talk to you a little bit about climate batteries, something we call climate batteries. It's basically a way to store heat. You can use it for cooling in both the summer and the winter, and you can use it as well for heating in the winter. So that'll make sense a little bit. So climate batteries for heating and cooling. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about these specifications for heat banks. There's so much more to talk about. We could spend the entire day talking about it. So this is going to be kind of an overview, hopefully with enough information that you could decide whether this might be something you'd like to pursue. Here is a Chinese greenhouse in China itself, an odd looking structure. You can't really tell from this picture, but the back on the right side, the roof on the right side is actually earth sheltered. So there's only glazing on the south side, a lot like a passive solar home. So that's a beautifully made Chinese greenhouse. This is ours. We built this when we were still working on it. And those solar modules are now mounted on a frame rather than leaning up against the front windows. That's the kind of hillbilly solar array there, but we've got them on a really nice adjustable array. But that's our Chinese greenhouse, a little fancier design. We'll talk to you, there it is in the winter before it was quite done. What I really like about this design, and I should preface this by we live in East Central Missouri, kind of over near Herman, Missouri, if you guys know where that is. We're about 70 miles south and west of St. Louis. And one of the things I really like about this Chinese greenhouse is in the 3 years that we've grown over the winter, the temperatures never drop below 50 degrees. And there's no supplemental heating. It's solely based on solar energy. It never drops below 50 degrees, which means you can keep a lot of things alive. We grow grapefruit and orange and banana trees in there. Some tropical plants, like we've been growing kratom bushes, and the 50 is a little too cold for them. They really suffer. But a lot of things like the grapefruit and orange and banana trees, they don't have any problem with getting as low as 50. So here's inside the greenhouse, some of the things we grow in there. You can see tomatoes and beans in the foreground. I guess I better put on my reading glasses. And some flowers. We like to have a lot of flowers in the greenhouse, supposedly to help control bugs. And there's Swiss chard in the foreground and marigolds and just a whole bunch of neat stuff. And this is taken in the dead of winter. So we typically will have tomatoes and peppers through February. The one issue we've been having is controlling bugs in there. So we're still working on that. Here's some squash that we planted in the greenhouse. What is that? That is a kratom. It's a kratom tree. It's a Southeast Asian tree, and the leaves are ground up, and the powder is great for pain control and whatnot. Now, if you go on the internet, you will see Chinese style greenhouses like this above ground greenhouse. And I want to caution you against that. This greenhouse has a lot of features of a well-functioning Chinese greenhouse, except it's not earth sheltered. They don't have to be earth sheltered, but they perform a lot better if they're earth sheltered. They stay warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. And this structure also didn't have a lot of thermal mass built into it, so it doesn't stay as warm as we'd like. Okay, so what is a Chinese greenhouse? Here's a photograph of an actual Chinese greenhouse. I think this is this is the 7th of March in the year 2004. They've got some kind of squash growing in there in March. Growing really, really well. And by the way, this area where they're employed in China is about the same latitude as we are here in Missouri. So we're there, you can install these greenhouses further north, further south. But so basically what it is it's a way, the Chinese greenhouse is a structure. I'm going to try to move you guys over here so I can see my screen. It's a way to grow warm weather vegetables, okay, in the off season. You know, if I don't know how many of you guys are gardeners, but you know, if you're like me, when it starts getting cold and you see your gardens dying, you kind of die a little inside yourself, you know. But so this is a structure that allows you to continue to grow, not just anything, but to grow warm weather vegetables in that off season, the late fall, the winter, and early spring. So you can basically grow year round. Oops, what happened here? Okay, it's kind of it's a new generation of greenhouse. Greenhouses haven't improved much in hundreds of years, but this is a fairly new generation greenhouse. It's probably 40 years old. The Chinese started building these in the 1980s, and it's designed, as I said before, for year-round production, even in pretty cold climates, using only solar energy. Okay, no backup heat. And that's what kills wintertime growing. You know, doesn't kill it. I should restate that. That can get extremely expensive. You know, trying to heat a greenhouse like this to keep it above a certain temperature can cost thousands of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars over the winter, sometimes thousands of dollars over any 1 month. So what are the secrets to this? It's an all-season greenhouse. What are the secrets? Well, if you know, and I assume a lot of you are up to date on this, it's designed a lot like a passive solar home. And that's what really got me excited about it, because one of my very first books was The Solar House, which is just about passive solar heating and cooling. And I've designed and built a number. I've consulted on solar homes all across the States and across Canada. And I've lived in them. I just built one here when our farmhouse burned down. I built a beautiful passive solar home here. So basically, we're going to use a lot of the same, we're going to use all the same principles we use when we design a passive solar home. Now, here's my home in Evergreen, Colorado. It's nestled into the ground. You can see on the roof, you can see grass growing up on the roof. So it's almost completely earth sheltered. Focused most of the windows on the south side. It's probably a little overglazed. And this was an off-grid home. I lived there off-grid in Evergreen, Colorado for 14 years. And that solar system that you're looking at in the background is 1.1 kW. In other words, 1,100 watts. So my two sons and I lived in that house. We had all the amenities of a home off 1,100 watt solar system. So we captured rainwater off the roof. We grew a lot of our own stuff indoors. That's just a whole nother conversation. But in any event, that we use the same principles to build a Chinese greenhouse. This is the book I referred to earlier, one of my earliest books, one of my best-selling books, The Solar House. So here, if we just take a moment, and I know many of you know this, but basically, if you think about passive solar design, what we're trying to do is create a house that stays naturally cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Very simple. And basically, the main source of energy is solar. If you do it right, and you're in the right climate, you can get 100% of your heating and cooling naturally. It's not always achieved. A lot of people have to provide a little backup heating and cooling, but if you do it right, you can get a very large percentage of your heating and cooling naturally, a free heat for life and free cooling for life. And these homes, as you recall, as you may know, is that they're designed to capture that low-angled sun. You know how low it gets in the sky in the fall, winter, and spring. So these homes are designed to capture that low-angled winter sun in the fall, winter, and spring. And one of the ways to achieve that is by orienting the long axis east and west. Okay, that's one of the keys. Now, another principle of passive solar design is that we minimize or sometimes eliminate the glazing on the north, east, and west sides. Generally, I need to explain that to people, but I'm pretty sure you understand that we do that because if you got sunlight streaming in from the south side, you don't want the heat streaming out on the northeast and west sides. And then, of course, this strategic glazing also reduces summertime solar heat gain, so it helps passively cool it. Insulate the heck out of these structures. That's one thing that we've learned over the years. A lot of the early solar homes built in the 70s, for example, in the Denver metro area, weren't that well sealed up and weren't that well insulated. They didn't perform that well. So one thing you want to do with a passive solar home is insulate it. You want it airtight, and you want to provide thermal mass to store that heat. So when that sun warms the house during the day, the surplus heat is stored in some kind of thermal mass and then released into the structure at night. And those are the exact principles we use when building a Chinese greenhouse. Here's a drawing of a Chinese greenhouse. My son illustrated this book, and he's illustrated a number of my books. You can see that it's the glazing, or in this case, it's plastic, faces south. The structure is earth sheltered and well insulated, and it's really designed to capture that low angled winter sun. Now there'll be still plenty of sun in the summer to grow, and still plenty of sun to overheat, but this helps us really take advantage of that low angled winter sun. So these structures are very equivalent. The Chinese greenhouse on the bottom right, and this passive solar home in Evergreen, Colorado on the left. As I said, very different from a traditional greenhouse. You really couldn't design a more energy inefficient structure than a conventional greenhouse. Maybe the only thing less efficient is a tent. They're just really not designed for energy efficiency. Most greenhouses are designed to allow people to start growing early in the spring, or not maybe mid-spring, so they have crops, their seedlings and whatnot ready to put out in their gardens in the summer. And some people grow through the summer and into the fall, but they're basically not designed for winter use without the addition of tons of supplemental heat. So back to the Chinese greenhouse. This is really what we've just said. They're designed to grow warm weather fruits and vegetables throughout the winter, using only solar energy, typically earth sheltered. If you don't have a site that's has at least a 10% slope to it, you can berm them. You can, when you excavate, you can use that supplemental dirt to berm the structure so it is earth sheltered. Long axis oriented east and west. They're insulated at night. Now that's an important thing. So in a cold winter night, you want to be able to pull some insulation down over that glass, or in this case, under that glazing, to hold that heat in. And they're built with thermal mass to retain that heat, built airtight. And then if you want to grow in the summer, you've got to find a way to cool. You've got to find a way to cool them. And it's really essential. Now, there's one of the secrets to the success of the greenhouse is this nighttime insulation. And I love what this is a Chinese greenhouse, one of the early iterations. This is their actually first generation. And they made these clever straw blankets. Now look at that structure. Look at that straw. They roll it down over the roof at night and then roll it back up. Now, I would not recommend that. That's a pretty sophisticated structure, and it's not going to hold up the moisture. But the Chinese quickly realized that was a cool idea, but not a smart idea. And then they've gone to synthetic fabrics to try to hold that heat in. At this point, they were still manually raising and lowering them, which is a lot of work. And then they designed technology to help raise and lower that insulation blanket with electricity. Much smarter way to do it. Okay. Now, on your greenhouse, I mean, if you're going to build one of the things that you can do, and one of the things that we did, is you can install an insulation blanket, and we have an interior insulation blanket, but we also installed some polycarbonate. We use the 2-wall polycarbonate, which just has one chamber, but you can get 2 or 3-wall polycarbonate to insulate that your glazing or your solar aperture. Now here's ours. We basically strung an insulation a material called this is the one we use is the name's slipping my mind right now. Aluminate. It's an aluminized shade cloth. It's I think this one's polypropylene or polyethylene, treated with UV resistant materials. And what we did is we suspended it above some cable. And so we can raise and lower it. This is actually conventional shade cloth that you're looking at, but that can be lowered at night to help hold the heat in. And that's the big challenge, keeping that greenhouse warm at night. Now, this is that Chinese greenhouse I showed you earlier, the one that was above ground, beautiful. They got a beautiful growing operation in there, but they used a product similar to Aluminate called TICS. It's Tempa Interior Climate Screen. I prefer Aluminate because there are places online where you can order it in multiple sizes. It comes with grommets and it's much easier. This is the stuff I'm talking about. This is Aluminate. This is what I replaced our conventional shade cloth with this. It's a reflective barrier. Most of your heat loss in a greenhouse at night is infrared, okay? Infrared radiation. So by placing a radiant barrier essentially between the greenhouse and the glazing or glass or plastic, you now are able to reflect a lot of that heat back into the greenhouse. So that's really important. It's not really a great insulator in the sense of, but given what insulation does, but it does prevent that main source of heat loss, which is IR radiation. Now, when we built ours, you're looking at the inside of the north-facing wall. We used rammed earth tires. My house in Colorado, in Evergreen, Colorado, is rammed earth tire home. I decided, I don't know who the we is, I decided to do the same thing in Missouri. And there's a whole story behind that. It's a nice, convenient way to put tires to good use. It's a lot of work, but it can be, the work can be lessened, but that's not the point of this slide. Just to let you know, we did it this time. Were I to do it again, I choose another material, and I'll show you that later. But notice these thick, this is the north facing wall, and on the outside, it's waterproofed all the way to the top and bermed almost to the very top of that wall. But that's a 12-inch deep cavity, which we packed with cellulose. We also used TJIs in the roof, which were left over from building our house. And so we have also 12 inches of cellulose, dense packed cellulose in the ceiling. So once we framed it up, you can see we're starting to plaster the wall down below. Can you see my arrow, or can you see my pointer when I point things out? Can you see that down? It's right on the white spot. Am I wasting my time doing that? Probably can't.
And we can see it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we see it. We see
All
it.
right, so you can see that this is, we've started to plaster here, but what we did is we put 2 layers of 11 mil polyethylene. We nailed it to the frame. We did the same thing in the roof, and then we packed it with insulation. Now, I also used some of this Reflectix type insulation. It's an insulated bubble wrap, essentially. So after we had filled that cavity with insulation, we applied painted OSB just to help reduce water penetration. And then we taped all the seams, and then we placed this reflective material over that to provide yet another level of insulation and some reflection to keep the back of the greenhouse brighter. So that's insulation. That's, we're looking at basically any wall that's not thermal mass and it's not plastic to let light in should be insulated. And you want to insulate the glazing as well. Now in China, they go very deep into the earth. You can see how deep they are. I don't know, that must be 8 to 10 feet deep into the earth. And they don't typically add a lot of thermal mass. They use thermal mass from in the soil, but they'll also often put a parge coat, a coat of concrete, as you can see here, over that back wall, and that serves as some thermal mass. They've got a walkway here, which adds thermal mass, and then the soil in here supplies additional thermal mass. So very lovely structure, very, very nice way of growing food. So we decided, though, or I decided, as I mentioned earlier, to use rammed earth tires. We also, we built this, and I can't remember when we started doing the tire packing, it was like 2016. It was just an absolutely miserably hot, humid summer. We'd start at 6:30 in the morning, and by 11, we just had to quit. So we got to thinking, Dan got to thinking, maybe we better do something to cool us too. So we put in an earth cooling tube. This is 4-inch PVC, and we ran it. Let's see if I've got the pictures. No, I don't. We ran it underground about 100 feet. We dug down, we got a mini excavator, and we excavated a trench about 100 feet out into a pasture, laid this pipe in it, made sure that it sloped downhill the whole way, so if any moisture condensed in there, it would drain out. And then we daylighted it out in the pasture. And so we just did that as an experiment while we were building, and we ran a little test. It was 104 degrees out when we ran the test. We put a little solar-powered DC fan on that, and the air coming through that earth cooling tube was 80 degrees. So it really, really, really worked well. And as a result of that experiment, we put another one in. We installed a 6-inch earth cooling tube on the other side of the greenhouse that runs about 130 feet into another pasture, and we dug that down even deeper, about 7 or 8 feet deep. So this is something to seriously think about, whether you're building a conventional greenhouse or whether you're building a Chinese greenhouse. It's not a bad idea to add this natural cooling. And like I said, we use solar modules that we stripped off my house in Colorado that had originally been installed in '95. We use those because I upgraded that solar system when I rented that property. And so we use those. It's DC direct. They're mounted on a rack in front of the greenhouse. When the sun shines, it turns those fans on, and it draws that cool air into the structure. Here we are. We're framed in. We've got the glass, the windows in. Notice there's a chicken always inspecting our work. And we're beginning to plaster that earth and those rammed earth tire walls. Here's a couple of my workers plastering that back wall. You can see these are all jam-packed with insulation. You can see these cavities here to the left of this other worker. And if I were to do it again, I would probably opt for something like this. These are those monster bin blocks. Almost all concrete companies, people who send trucks of concrete out to job sites, make these bin blocks out of waste concrete. Truck comes back with a couple yards of concrete in, or a half a yard. They pour them in these molds and make these lovely blocks. We took 2 summers and part of a winter to pack those tires. There were only 200 in our structure, and I was in my late 60s, so I wasn't doing a whole lot in any one day. But we could have basically brought these in and built the walls in a week at the very most. So those are bin blocks. I'd really seriously encourage you to think about using them. You can use cement blocks. You want to fill them with a mass material, either sand or concrete, so you increase the thermal mass. You could use solid cement blocks. They're kind of airy. They're not as good a thermal mass as say a bin block. All right, so now everybody got that. So thermal mass really, really is important. Now, typically for our winter, we plant in September. So we start our whole set of crops in September. You can continue to plant through October and November, but the earlier you get it in, the more likely you'll have a crop in the winter months. Here, this is, I don't know what the date and this is, but you can see this is sometime, I think probably in November or something, in a Chinese greenhouse in China, where they've actually sown all these crops. And then we harvest in January, February, March. You can harvest in November too, October, November, depending on what you put in. Here are English cucumbers. Now, I've had a really hard time growing cucumbers. They're so susceptible to powdery mildew. We're still working on ways to reduce that. And I should mention that the reason for that is I also have 2 aquaponics systems set up in my greenhouse. So I've got 7 tanks of about 200 gallons full of fish and water and plants growing in them. And so there's a lot of moisture in my greenhouse. So I've installed a lot of DC fans to move that moisture, to move the air around. And so just keep in mind that if you start to incorporate things like hydroponics or aquaponics into a Chinese greenhouse, you'll have more moisture to deal with. So we harvest late. Now, the key to a Chinese greenhouse is the proper orientation. Just like a solar house, you want to orient so the long axis runs east and west. And this should be a diagram that's very familiar to all of you guys. Usually I have to explain to people, but this is the path of the sun at the summer solstice in red, the winter solstice in blue, and the equinoxes. So what we're really trying to do in this greenhouse is capture sun from the equinoxes from the spring and fall equinoxes to the winter solstice. So that's why we orient to the south. We orient the long axis east-west, so it's pointing south. The glazing is pointing south, and we're primarily trying to capture that heat for growth, for growing. Now, one thing that I really want to mention that I guess probably I'm sure most of you guys know is we want to orient to true south, not magnetic south. Now, I doubt you guys need to be informed of that, but just in case, you know, what true south is true south are the lines of longitude. Okay, they run from the North Pole to the South Pole. So when you're orienting your Chinese greenhouse, you want to orient to true south. And as you all know, I love this last slide, I should go back to it. The Earth is a huge magnet. I mean, it's got this inner core of nickel and iron, and it churns and it creates this massive magnetic field. It's utterly fascinating. Without that magnetic field and without the ozone layer, we could not live on this planet. The magnetic field repels a lot of radiation from the sun and keeps us safe. So there is a North Pole and South Pole, but here's the thing, and again, I'm sorry if I'm telling you stuff you already know, but it's just kind of, there's a beautiful slide anyway, it's kind of fun to review this, but the magnetic lines, magnetic north and south, don't always follow true north and south. Okay, there's that picture showing how that magnetic field prevents us from being bombarded by this corpuscular radiation, the beta, or I can't remember what they are, alpha particles and whatnot. But so true south and magnetic north and south rarely coincide. This map, it's a little bit old, it was 2005, shows you the magnetic declination. And what that is that, so if you follow, let's just start here right in the very middle of the country, right here, there's St. Louis right there, and there I live right over about there. And what this graph tells us is that on that line, that the magnetic field corresponds precisely with true north and south. But as we move west, okay, we get out here to around Topeka, Kansas, or we get out to Denver, Colorado, or we get out to Nevada and San Francisco, there's a deviation or a declination. And so what this says at this 5% line, that 5-degree line, it tells us that at that point, if you hold the compass and it points to magnetic south, that magnetic south is actually, or south is actually 5 degrees east of magnetic south. So you'd want to orient your greenhouse 5 degrees east of your magnetic reading. Out here in Colorado, it's 10 degrees. So you stand anywhere along this line and your compass says, okay, that's magnetic south. Well, true south will be 10 degrees east of that. Now, when you go to the right here, it's a westerly declination. So in other words, if you're on this line, magnetic south, true south is 5 degrees west of magnetic south. Okay. Now, remember too that compass readings can be influenced by iron and steel. You don't want to just pop out of your truck or your car with a compass and try to figure out where magnetic south is. Steel posts can cause this deviation. Metal buildings are especially difficult to find north and south anywhere near them. The compass deviates so dramatically. So stay away from the vehicle and step away from those metal buildings. It's just amazing when you stand on the south side of a building like this, it'll point to the south, it'll be way off to your left. And then as you move away from the building, the compass needle will correct itself. All right, so we're getting toward the end here. What is the ideal angle for that glass or plastic? You notice mine's a fairly shallow angle. I drew up really neat plans and then I committed them to memory, and then my memory didn't do so well. I made a couple of mistakes. As this wall ended up being a little taller and this wall ended up being this peak of the roof was a little lower. So really, if I were to do this again, I would raise that. This would be higher. This would be a steeper roof line. So I don't know what I was thinking. It was probably the heat or humidity and old age that why bother looking at plans if you got it in your head, right? So anyway, if you were to do it again, basically the rule of thumb is you take your latitude and add about 20 degrees to get the ideal angle for that south facing glass or plastic. Okay, so take your lines of latitude. These are, as you see this map here, 35 degrees. So most of us are up here around, I assume a lot, I don't actually know where most of you are from, but here's kind of central Kansas and Missouri. We're about 38 degrees north latitude at that point. Okay, so if you're in Belton, Texas, which is 30 degrees north latitude, you'd put the steep angle of about 50 degrees. Okay, now it turns out that this graph comes from this book, the Year-Round Solar Home or Solar Greenhouse. This is an actual study where they looked at the angle of incidence versus the light transmission. Okay, so how much light is actually coming through? What's the angle of incidence? And now the angle of incidence is basically if light strikes a surface at 90 degrees, we call that an incidence angle of 0. If it's off 10 degrees, that's an incidence angle of 10 degrees. If it's off 20, it's 20 degrees. And this shows you that you really don't, in most glazing material, or the glazing materials that they tested, you don't really see much decrease in solar gain until you get up to about 50 or 60 degree incidence angles. So that's about the angle you're looking at, is to really prevent excess heat gain in the summer. Okay, now, as I mentioned, I've tried to do more with the Chinese greenhouse than just build a passive structure. I've looked at a lot of cool ways, again, using renewable energy to heat and cool it. And I'm trying to get the temperature higher in the winter and cooler in the summer naturally. And so one of the things that we use of these structures called climate batteries is just a fancy term for some thermal mass that you bury in the ground underneath your greenhouse. But climate battery sounds really fancy. And so the way we do it here is that the way I've done it in my house, we've got an active underground underfloor heat storage system. And during the day and in the winter and in the summer, that hot air, let's deal with the winter right now. The hot air rises to the top of the greenhouse during the day. And then what we do is I've got some pipes, I'll show you shortly, at the near the ceiling level. And the pipes then, when the sun's shining, there's a thermostatically controlled fan in the greenhouse. And so when it gets to about 75, 80 degrees, it turns on, and that pumps that hot air from the ceiling level down into some floor mass. Basically, it's river gravel, and there are pipes that run through this river gravel in the floor of the greenhouse. And so it takes that hot air and dumps it using solar powered fans and dumps it into this network it transports it through this network of pipes through this thermal mass, and it warms that up during the day. And then that heat is able to migrate up into the greenhouse at night. So this is a real simple drawing of the system that we designed. Very, very simple. There's a whole network of pipes here on the floor. And I used 3-inch PVC pipe, and I drilled some holes through it. I would strongly recommend that you use the corrugated black ABS plastic that drain pipe. Use that for, and so what happens is when the sun shines, that this DC fan turns on and it starts sucking the greenhouse air. It starts sucking that, or sucking it out of this network of pipes, drawing the air out, and that allows the hot air up near the ceiling, that draws the hot air back down through this system. So we get some really nice air circulation through there, and that keeps the greenhouse from overheating, even during the winter, which can happen. Okay, stores that heat in the floor, and then that heat is, we're not very deep there, maybe 8-10 inches down, so that heat can then migrate up into the greenhouse and help keep it warmer. Now you say, Dan, why am I trying to cool a greenhouse in the winter? And then the reason for that is that greenhouses can get pretty hot on a hot summer day, hot winter day. Take Colorado, for example, on a sunny, I misspoke there, on a sunny but cold winter day, greenhouses can get mighty hot. And what a lot of people don't understand is that photosynthesis really starts to slow down when the temperatures get above 85 degrees. It starts to slow down, and when the temperature in a greenhouse gets to 100, photosynthesis is pretty much stopped. So in order for your greenhouse to thrive, or your plants to thrive, you want to keep that temperature in the 80s, maybe low 90s. So that's why this helps during the winter. What a lot of conventional greenhouse operators do is they just open windows and let that heat out. But to me, that's kind of silly. You've got this free heat. Why not just capture it, put it in the floor, put it in your grow beds, and absorb that heat for nighttime use? So that's what we do, and it works really, really well. We've started building some raised beds in there. We're going to bury some pipe in those and actually run the heat through the soil in those raised beds. And then one of the things that we want to do, let me go back, let me just jump quickly. Oh, I forgot that slide. So then one of the things that we're going to do too is put some PVC pipe over this and then drape plastic over it during the winter to kind of create a little microclimate. So it'll even be warmer inside those raised bed gardens. Now we do hydroponics as well. So we grow fish in a big 275-gallon tank, fish from our pond. We have bluegills and catfish, and we feed them the wastewater. Then the wastewater then circulates through 3 other large tanks, a couple 100 gallons each. And we have plants growing in those grow beds, and they're basically, we've got foam rafts. The plants are in these little net pots. The roots suspend into that fertilized water, suck up the nutrients, and that forms a hydroponic system. But the point I want to make is that if you wanted to, you could also run those heat pipes right underneath your hydroponic or your aquaponic grow beds. All right, so just as a quick summary, in the winter, the climate battery will cool it during the will cool it during the day and heat it at night. And you're basically just temporarily storing that heat for nighttime use, trying to keep the greenhouse from overheating and storing that heat for nighttime use. All right, so basically I talked all about this. One of the things that I want to point out about this climate battery is this point right here that water vapor condenses. So remember what you're doing now in this greenhouse is you're pumping warm, moist air underground. And what happens is as it flows underground is it condenses. And as many of you know, when water vapor condenses, it gives off a lot of heat, okay? The reason for that is that when water evaporates, it takes a bucket load of heat to drive water from a liquid state to a vapor, to actually propel those water molecules out of an aqueous environment into the air. It takes a bucket load of energy. A lot of calories go into that process. And when you reverse the process, when you go from water vapor back down to water as a liquid, all that heat is given off. And we call that the latent heat of condensation. And all right, so what I want to point out about that is by doing this, you're acquiring 5 times more energy than you would if you're just taking the heat from that air and dumping into the ground. So in other words, by allowing that air to condense, by allowing that warm, moist air to condense, you're generating an awful lot more heat for your greenhouse. So this slide just explains everything I said. I kind of get ahead of myself a little bit. Takes a huge amount of water to huge amount of energy to go from water to liquid. That's the latent heat of vaporization. And then in movement in the reverse direction results in that release of energy. Pretty cool. Now you can do that in a regular greenhouse too. So if some of you aren't interested in building a Chinese greenhouse, you use this idea in a regular greenhouse too to boost its wintertime performance. And so at night, the reverse occurs. Now, I'm getting toward the end here, and I want to just give you a few guidelines. You need to design these climate batteries pretty specifically, and some very talented individuals have worked out the math on it and have offered these guidelines for creating an effective climate battery. And one of the first things you need to do is circulate the entire, one of the goals is to circulate the entire volume of that greenhouse air through your battery, through your heat storage area, at least 5 times per hour. Okay, so it's not that hard to figure it out. You can figure the volume pretty easily. You can figure the volume of the pipes in the floor. You can figure the air movement of your fans, and you can come up pretty good idea of how many fans you need, what size fans, etc. you need to make that happen. So we want to circulate that air through that climate battery, through that heat storage medium 5 times per hour. And we'd like the air to move at about 5 feet per second or 1.5 meters per second. So those are some of the guidelines when designing a climate battery. And there's a lot more about the design in the Chinese greenhouse book for any of you guys who bought it or are thinking about it. Now, as I said, one of the things I'm really trying to do is make this Chinese greenhouse work better. So there's an entire chapter, a couple chapters in the book about how you could supplement, how you could get that, how you could store additional heat using solar hot water system or solar hot air system. And the idea here is that you're going to basically augment that system that we already talked about, that underground network of pipes. But so what we're going to do then is add to this a solar hot water system or a solar hot air system. And I would really suggest solar hot air as opposed to solar hot water for cost reasons and it's a much easier system. So we haven't done this yet, but we've built our own solar hot air collector, and we're going to set it up so we can dump additional heat. This will be set up outside the greenhouse. Will absorb additional heat on a sunny but cold winter day, and just add that to that underfloor storage system we have. We haven't got it in yet, but that we've got it all all designed and ready to go in, but we haven't done it. Here's the solar hot air collector we designed. We use some plywood for the back and some cedar for the front, and we use a metal roofing as our absorber plate. You can see it. It's all insulated. I can't remember whether you use an inch or inch and a half of polystyrene foam, and put a hole in the top and a hole in the bottom. And again, there's the dark metal roofing as our heat absorber plate. And there it is when it's done. Needless to say, we're not going to be producing these commercially, but it's very, very effective. And what we do is we hook up a pipe to the top, pipe to the bottom, and the cold air from the greenhouse will be pumped into this very crude heat absorber, a solar hot air collector. It'll circulate through here, warm up, and then it'll pour into the greenhouse through this top hole and a pipe. So very simple design. The design is in the Chinese greenhouse book. So my friends, here is kind of a simplified drawing of the Chinese greenhouse that we built. We chose to use framing lumber, and we used all pressure treated lumber in here just because it's such a moist environment. You can also do an arched roof, or build one out of square steel tubing, or you could actually have a truss built for you. So that's the design. There's the thermal mass. In our case, we actually didn't insulate under our climate battery, but for best performance, you should probably insulate underneath it. We did insulate this outside wall. We put R25 rigid foam insulation on the outside of this wall to hold that heat in. We really wanted to actually, let me backtrack, I'm sorry. This is our diagram of our superficial heat storage. I was really hoping to be able to go deep enough to dig an entire set of pipe down below, maybe 6 or 8 feet down, to take that excess summer heat from that greenhouse and store it deep in the earth so we could use that for the wintertime storage. But we got down about 5 or 6 feet and had enough room to place this superficial collector, heat exchanger, and then we just hit solid limestone. So we did not install a deeper one, but if you're in an area where you've got really soft soil and you can go deep, I'd strongly consider putting in a deeper heat exchanger or a deeper climate battery to take all that surplus summer heat, dump it underground, and store it for the winter use. And there's a whole chapter on that kind of system. All right, my friends. Well, there's much more to talk about. I'd be happy to take questions. I want to point out this gentleman is Sanjan Gu, Dr. Sanjan Gu. He's a horticulturalist at North Carolina State University. He's the one that actually introduced me to the Chinese greenhouse. I was teaching at a little college just part-time a few years ago up in Iowa. And he came up to visit during the day, and he was in the faculty lunchroom, and I met him, and he started telling me about Chinese greenhouses. And I said, "Oh man, can you come over and talk to my class?" And so he came to my class and gave a presentation, and then handed me all of his slides. So I want to just, point out, thank him for his contribution. He used to be with the University of Missouri Extension Service, and now he's with North Carolina State. But Sanjan Gu, he's the gentleman who's really helped me learn about Chinese greenhouses, has been completely unselfish in sharing all the information he has. So my friends, I would be just more than pleased to answer any questions you have. So why don't we open it to questions?
Okay, and why don't you unmute or unshare your screen, and then we can see everybody.
Okay.
And if everybody can leave their phones or their Zoom muted until you have a question, and then unmute yourself, and then if somebody beats you to the punch, just go back and mute yourself again. And I assume, I'll start it off, I assume that this Chinese greenhouse system can be scaled down to whatever is practical for your yard or your neighborhood.
Absolutely. And, you know, I've got a gentleman in Topeka that's building, I don't know, it's a couple 100-foot long Chinese greenhouse, but you can build it fairly small. Mine, by the way, is about 30 feet long and about 26 feet deep. And my only regret is that I didn't build it bigger because it's rather addictive.
Yeah. Who else has a question?
I'd like to say something real quick. You had that Mylar bubble wrap stuff with the Mylar in it that you used as the kind of liner on the inside of your greenhouse.
Well, it's not bubble. We have two things, Ken. We've got that bubble, that aluminized. It used to be called Reflectix, but that's sort of like Xerox. That was the brand name. I still call it Reflectix, but I just love that name. But it's a thin bubble wrap type material, typically aluminized on both sides. That we use to insulate, to cover the back walls in the framed in north facing roof. The other material, the aluminate, or that TICS, that stuff is an aluminized, sometimes I think it's a aluminized polyethylene material treated with an ultraviolet retardant, UV radiation retardant. That's the stuff. It's used as a shade cloth in the summer. I skipped over this point. We use it as a shade cloth in the summer. In fact, I've got it up right now because it's getting so hot. Mine is designed to block 30% of the incoming solar radiation in the summer, just to keep that greenhouse cooler. And so we use it during the day in the summer, and at night it serves as a radiative barrier to heat loss in the greenhouse during the winter.
Okay. Well, the point I wanted to bring up is that because this happens to be something I've studied as far as vapor barriers and permeability and all that. In our climate, if you don't use perforated, you can use about anything, but it has to allow moisture to pass through it both ways. And if you use that product that has no perforations, it becomes a vapor barrier, not a retarder, a complete barrier. And anything behind it, if there's any moisture forming against that, and it gets, when you have wood behind it or whatever, there's going to be moisture there, and it's going to cause problems. So I don't know if you use that product or you just use it.
Ken, we were very, very aware of this whole issue, and we basically, through multiple layers of protection, tried to create a totally impervious surface on the insulated walls so that moisture could not get in, period. And that may have been a mistake, but basically we did not use a perforated. I know the product you're talking about, the room I'm sitting in, we use that radiant barrier, and it's perforated. We used it, and we tacked it to the underside of the rafters. In the greenhouse, my goal was just to make a completely watertight wall. There's no penetrations. Every seam is taped. We've got multiple layers of protection from moisture. You'll probably tell me next time I talk to you, I made a mistake, but we put 2 layers of 11 mil polyethylene first. Then we put a OSB. I can't remember the thickness of it. We painted it to make it less water pervious. We taped the seams. Then we applied this Reflectix material, and we taped those seams, and we have no penetration. So my goal was to make a completely, don't smile like that, was to create a completely waterproof surface so no moisture could get in. And you know from your experience that if you look at moisture penetration in a wall, there are 3 sources of it. One is bad flashing, okay? That's the number 1 problem. We have no flashing, no way for water to get into that. The second thing is penetration, like light switches, electrical outlets, ceiling boxes. We have no penetration. And so the third source is direct penetration through the wall. And in a home, if you compare the 3, Flashing, improper flashing is about a gallon of water, and it's just to compare their contribution. Penetration through, water penetration into the wall through openings is maybe a cup, and water going directly through the wall itself is like a thimble. So we figured we're eliminating those two major sources, and then we're absolutely killing the last one. So there's no source for water to get in there. Okay. We'll have dinner over that one. I can see it in your eyes.
Other questions? I assume, Dan, that if someone wanted to build this and they got your book, that they would have all kinds of instructions in there about the things you've talked about in this presentation.
Absolutely. And then this one would be helpful as well.
Okay.
This hand published book, but the Chinese greenhouse book, sorry, I'm having breakfast here, but the Chinese greenhouse book has information, every chapter. There's a chapter just on building. In fact, there's 2 chapters on building a Chinese greenhouse, and it goes through every one of your options. What are your options for framing? What are your options for insulation? What are your options for thermal mass? What are your options for, did I say insulation? I can't remember. So it's a 2 detailed chapters just on what all your options are.
Right.
And so got a ton of information. And then if you want to pick up a copy of this, I mean, I always think it's kind of cool to watch and see what people did and go, oh, I would never do that. Why did Dan do that? I would have done this. I would have done that. And I just think it's always, examples are always good to learn from.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, can we make that book available through the HRES website? Just like
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Craig asked me to point out that for the folks who have watched this, or maybe they would just want to get the book because they missed the presentation, I'm going to make a link and make it available for a little while. Now, I have to point out to everybody that's on this presentation right now that this is a favor you're doing to send the books directly from you. Most people have to order them from the publisher or Amazon or something. So we're going to let this be available for a while, but I don't want to make it where you're doing this for long term because you obviously travel a lot and have other things happening. So I think in maybe a couple of weeks after this presentation, we'll make these books available. And will you be able to do an autographed version of that second book that you just showed us?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that instantly raises the value of that book by 25 cents.
Oh, wow.
You're not going to want to miss that. And
All
there's
right,
no extra charge. John Elway charges $15 or $20 for his signature, not me.
Now the other book you had 2 more books you wanted to mention while we're here.
Oh yeah. Well, I've written a lot of books, and some of you got, and I'm trying not really trying to brag here, but this is one of my newest. This has been a real bestseller of mine, Solar Electricity Basics. And it's out in a new edition. So it includes all the new stuff. My standby for those of you who really want to learn solar is this book. It's Solar Power from the Sun. And I do also have another book that might be of interest called The Scoop on Poop. It's about composting human manure, and about gray water systems. How do you basically take all those nutrient-rich excretions that we humans produce in vast quantity and put them to use, get them back in the soil where they belong? And finally, I've got 2 books. I got a book called Living Comfortably Off-Grid that I self-published, and this one also called Survive in Style. It's called a prepper's guide, but basically each chapter, like say, just take the chapter on food. It starts off with, here's the kind of foods, here's how much food you should store if you're thinking you'll have a three-month period where you won't be able to go to the grocery store. Or if you're doing it for 6 months, here are your options. Here's how much you should put aside, where you should put it aside, how you should store it. What are your options? Dehydrated food versus canned food and so on. And then the rest of the chapter is about growing your own food. So get yourself ready for another COVID crisis. Get yourself ready for that. But then how do you set up a garden so that you can grow your own food? How do you how do you grow indoors under LED lights? So that's water's the same way, energy's the same way. What do we do if we lose electricity? What do you do? What are the immediate things you need to be prepared for? And then in the long run, how do you get yourself ready to produce your own electricity? So that's it. That's it for the end of the commercial. I'm happy to take any more questions if there are.
Well, let's continue the commercial just a little bit. And you've written 38 books. If someone wanted to see or buy any of those, where would they go?
Well, you can order a lot of them. I have a website called windrivermusic.net.
Wind River Music?
Yeah, I'm also a musician. So, but you can, I have a windrivermusic.net, and there's a page where you can order books from that website. Ken's in the process of putting together a comprehensive website for me. But you can also order most of my books, except for the self-published ones. You can order them through Barnes & Noble or directly from the publisher. I usually recommend people buy from either the publisher or the author or Barnes & Noble, because they give the author a fair price. They give us more money. If you want to help the authors like myself, support our families and keep food on the table and buy more solar panels, it's best to buy it from Barnes & Noble or the publisher or from the author directly.
All right.
So sorry, Amazon. Didn't mean to slam you.
All right.
I think David Roberts had a question. David,
what's your question?
Unmute yourself. While he's trying to figure that out, let's go to Brent Ragsdale, who had a question. So unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Yeah, I was. I posted something in the chat. So I hadn't heard of the Illuminate shade cloth. I think that's a pretty neat product. I've become aware of a guy named Ye Tao who has a pretty out-of-the-box idea for helping cool the planet. And that is, instead of thinking about carbon sequestration or trying to block the sun with sulfur in the atmosphere, what we need is to have more reflective surfaces on the surface of the planet, because the physics is that visible light passes through the atmosphere, but if it heats up the ground or whatever, then the infrared radiation does not pass through the atmosphere. And so it seems to me that if all greenhouses in the summertime would switch to this Illuminate or something like it that also was reflective, that it would not only shade inside your greenhouse, but it would also help cool the planet slightly, because more of that light would be reflected back as visible light off the planet, as opposed to warming up the black shade cloth. So wasn't much of a question as much as just a thought and a comment. So what?
And Brand, you make a good point too, is never buy black shade cloth. Never buy black shade cloth, because what it does is it absorbs heat too. And so that, it shades, but it's also absorbing a lot of heat. Always buy a white shade cloth or the Illuminate, the aluminized. And, and your point's well made. It would probably be a fairly small contribution, but, for your own greenhouse sake, definitely you want a white shade cloth to reflect that light back, or an aluminized shade cloth like TICS or Illuminate to keep your greenhouse cooler and send some of that visible light right on back to the universe.
Well, that's a good tip. I'm going to try it. Thanks a lot.
Okay. And one thing I'd love to just summarize the cooling measures that we've done in the greenhouse, because that's a big challenge. And I mentioned them, but I'd love to just recapitulate. And so one of the things is we have the earth cooling tubes. The second cooling measure is that we have the shade cloth, the Illuminate shade cloth. And I've got it the whole greenhouse. I can I can block 30% of the incoming solar radiation that way. We also built 2 wind scoops. They're not in my slideshow, but they're at the very end of the book. I just built them right before the book went to press, so I snuck a picture in at the very end. But we took 6-inch PVC and we built these wind scoops that go from inside the greenhouse up the side of the greenhouse, and then they project above the roof of the greenhouse 6 or 7 feet above it. And what they do is we're on a fairly windy site, so they naturally funnel the breezes down through the greenhouse and help naturally ventilate it. So that's the third thing. And we also installed a AC vent fan on one side of the greenhouse, and we have a screen door in the greenhouse, and 3 out of the 6 windows are screened. So I think that's it. But we just keep in mind, if you do something like this, summertime cooling is a bear. When you figure you've got, I don't go through the math of it, but a tremendous amount of solar gain as a result of that sun, a tremendous amount of heat being absorbed into that greenhouse because of the sun. So keep that in mind. It's really quite a challenge. And there's a whole chapter in the book about what you need to do to keep that growing. A lot of times the Chinese just retire the greenhouses during the summer and they grow outdoors. I'm just figuring, well, let's keep growing in there, but keep it cool. Last year was our first summer where it never got over 90 degrees in there. So we're still trying to keep it a little cooler than that. But anyway, thought you should know.
David Roberts had a question and his mic isn't working, so I'm going to speak for him.
Okay.
On the south face, is insulation provided between the greenhouse and the earth berm on that side? On the south face,
right,
is insulation provided between the greenhouse and the earth berm on that side?
Well, the south face of the greenhouse is only about 12 inches into the ground. Okay, if I'm understanding this question, on the south side of the greenhouse, there's a vertical wall with windows on it. I could go to that picture. Let me pull up. Can I just go back to that picture and show?
Sure.
Okay, let me pull this up. And I think.
Don't forget to click share. You've selected your share, and now in the lower right corner, share your screen.
Okay, will do. I'll get it on there now. Hold on a second, I'm messing things up here. Okay, share screen. Okay. Oh shoot. Well, it's going to take me forever to get this right, but on the south side of that greenhouse, we're not that far into the dirt on the south side. We're only about 12 inches down. We have 2 courses of tires and then a framed up wall with glass in it. But we did insulate that as well. We did insulate that with some polystyrene, rigid foam polystyrene. Every other wall that is earth sheltered has R25 insulation around it. I don't know if that answered the question.
Okay.
Okay.
And then Nancy Chapman, did you have a question? Go ahead and unmute yourself and then ask the question.
No, I didn't have a question. I just didn't hear him talk about that there is a spray. It's like a gallon of paint you buy, but it's called like Block Out or something like that. That you can, it's white and you spray it on the exterior of your, I do more with high tunnels, so the plastic, and it's a single season. So by winter time, it's washed away, it's worn away, but that's a reflective sunblock. It does reduce your light in the 30-35% range, but it's for cooling versus that shade cloth.
Yeah, you'll see that if you drive by commercial greenhouses, you'll see shade cloth, and some of them you'll see, especially glass greenhouses, they'll paint that exterior surface of glass. Yes, definitely another way to another way to cool your greenhouse.
Any other questions? I've got one on your cooling tubes that cool in the summertime. Have you considered having another pipe that's got holes in it to carry water to keep the soil moist? And that would accomplish a couple of things. It would help cool the soil around the cooling pipes, and it would also, with our clay soils, help keep the contact of the soil to the air cooling pipes so that it would have better conduction.
Actually, we did. We ran a perforated drain pipe around the perimeter of the greenhouse and ran it down that first 100-foot
Yeah.
At 100-foot section. We ran a perforated ABS 4-inch ABS pipe along that length to help drain any moisture around the greenhouse. When you're earth sheltered, I should back up here too. There's another issue. When you're earth sheltered, any structure, you want to do a really good job of keeping moisture away from the walls of that greenhouse, because it'll find its way in. So we put in a standard
Drain tile system.
Yeah, what do they call them? French drain.
Yeah.
Around the base of the wall for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you move those bin blocks? Those things got to weigh literally a ton.
Oh yeah, and they come in different lengths up to like 6 feet. They have a little hook on the top. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you need to rent something like a mini excavator.
Yeah.
Or that would be a little more precise than, say, using a backhoe or the bucket of a tractor. I would just rent a mini excavator for the day and with the chain on it, chain them up, drop them in place.
Right.
And I should mention too, those bin blocks are really cheap, really cheap. The expensive part is the transportation.
Yeah.
They're so heavy, you can't carry that many on a truck. So I want to let everybody be aware of that. So if you've got a cement or concrete company nearby and you got a friend who has a trailer and a truck, move them yourself. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty expensive to have people ship them in.
Yeah. Other questions, folks? Wow. This was an excellent presentation, and I encourage folks to check out your other books that you've got. There is obviously going to be a wealth of knowledge about how to do things that help the planet.
Can I want to add one last thing? Heartland Renewable Energy Society is also sponsoring a couple homes for the National Solar Tour, part of the American Solar Energy Society. HRES is a chapter of ASIS, and so that'll be coming up. I believe it's in October, isn't it? Well, we'll have information on the website when we get closer, but Dan is going to be, he's generously going to have a tour of his farm and his home and all the things he's done as a virtual workshop that will be done on that tour. And then I imagine once the tour has come and gone, we'll probably have a link to it as well on our HRES website. So if you are interested in some of the other things Dan's done, besides the greenhouse, he's grown quite a variety of different animals on there and found out good and bad things about them, as far as, what's easier to grow or all. And he also knows what kind of plants grow well in greenhouses and which don't do well. And I imagine he's going to touch on a lot of other subjects and LED lighting, all the things he's touched on here. He'll talk about it a little bit more in depth as when we get to the point where we will have those that workshop. It's actually a solar tour of his farm available. And
and Ken, we built a straw bale cottage down by our pond that we're converting into a bed and breakfast Airbnb.
Really?
So people can come. I'll spend a half a day with you showing you all the stuff we've done. We've got rain catchment systems. We've got the hydroponic systems, aquaponic systems. We've got, soil-based gardening inside and outside. The house is super energy efficient. You're going to love this, R90 ceilings and R50 walls. We used earthen materials for thermal mass in the house. We used all green materials. So there's just a plethora of stuff. You can see right behind me that bright light that's kind of putting a halo around me. That's not a natural halo. I just want you guys to realize that. That's a solar tube skylight. And, you know, we remodeled the classroom building. That's all done green. And so we just have all kinds of things to see here. All sorts of things, solar hot water, 2 solar hot water systems, multiple solar electric systems, a wind turbine on a tilt-up tower. The list just goes on and on and on. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of things that we'd be happy to share with people, especially when we get that Airbnb set up.
You have electric vehicles.
We will let people know about that Airbnb on our website.
Yeah. If anybody wants to come help finish it up, you know, and do a little plastering with me, we'll give you a free night for every day you spend. How's that?
There you go.
And we've got great fishing in the pond.
Well, there you go. How can you beat that?
You can't. Oh, we use compost toilets everywhere, human composting toilets. So we try to do it all. All right, folks. Well, it's been a pleasure, really. Ken and Craig, thank you for the invitation and for making this work out. You guys are terrific, but you already know that, you know.
2 questions real fast.
Oh, sure.
How do you control your insects in your greenhouse? And what do you do with the waste from your compost toilets?
All right, let me do the waste from compost toilets. We have an outdoor, without getting into all the details, we have a 3-bin outdoor compost pile, a 3-chamber compost bin, okay? And so mostly what we do is we use the sawdust toilets. We've got more sophisticated. We've got 5 different types of composting toilets, but we tend to like the simpler ones where you're basically just pooping in a bucket and covering it with sawdust. We transport it out to the compost pile, and that has a lid on it so animals can't get in. Dogs just love this stuff, guys. So you got to have a way to keep the animals out. And every time you dump it in there, you cover it with a little straw or some leaves or whatever, and it decomposes. And so we start one pile and fill that up within 6 or 8 months, and then we move to the next. And within 3 months of the completion of a pile, it's completely decomposed down to this light, fluffy, organic humus. I don't want to get them mixed up. You don't want to make a hummus sandwich out of humus. But,
how to ruin a potato chip.
Yeah, yeah, really. And so then we apply that to the garden. Now, without getting in. Well,
what do you do with human pathogens? So how?
Well, here's
sanitize it, or they just don't survive?
George, when you put it out there and you put it in the compost pile, microorganisms, a wide assortment of bacteria and fungi, single-celled fungi, immediately begin to decompose the organic matter. And the temperature within your compost pile quickly reaches 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And then shortly after that, a whole new group of bacteria take over. And you can actually measure this in the pile. They're called thermophilic bacteria. Mm-hmm. And they take over and they raise the temperature to 150 degrees Fahrenheit for a short while. And compost human waste only needs to be exposed to about 135 degrees for 1 minute to destroy all the viruses, all the parasites, bacteria, bacterial spores, and microorganisms. And so just by composting it, letting nature do its thing, it essentially rids it of all the microorganisms that could be pathogenic. It's just amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. Now, what was your other question? Oh, insects. God, George, I wish I had an easy answer for that. That's been a real challenge.
Can you use either chickens or a vacuum cleaner to suck them up?
Chickens, not so good because they tend to eat a lot of the leaves. But, we've had trouble with thrips, with scale, with aphids, and I forget what the other one is. What I do is I spray with a soap spray frequently. And what I've learned is the best thing is the minute you have an insect outbreak, it usually starts in one plant, just get that plant the hell out of there. Don't even try controlling it because it will spread to the next one and it'll spread to the next one. And trying to control it with soap is just soap spray. It's just a constant battle. So that's been my experience. I have brought in ladybugs and they do a really good job, but then they vanish. They don't stay around. So my advice is this, is watch your crops very, very carefully. Don't crowd them. When I first got in there, guys, I wanted to put every square inch of space to use. So I had stuff jammed in there as tight as you could be. And it was an absolute nightmare with insects. So I cleaned the whole greenhouse out and started over and started putting, spacing between plants. Now we're also trying to include flowers. We've got marigolds, a couple different types of marigolds in there, and we've got nasturtiums and basil are all supposed to prevent insects, but I find the bugs like them just as much as anything else. So I haven't had really good luck with flowers, especially, that old standby marigold. They haven't just really worked very well. And I've got a bunch of them in there growing now. So anyway, the minute you watch those crops very, very, very carefully, the minute you see a problem, take the thing out. If it's got aphids on it, or if it's got white flies, that's the other one, or if it's got scale or mealybugs, get it outside, spray it, with a hose and leave it outside for a while. And if you can't clear it up, just kill it, just get rid of it. And don't ever bring it back into the greenhouse because it's just really hard. Really, really. The other thing too is that I've learned from some of the Amish that if you have good ventilation, and I mean strong fans set up in your greenhouse, that'll help prevent insects. So what we've installed is we've got about a 500-watt solar array south of the greenhouse, and it's all DC direct, no batteries. And we've wired those to some of those inline bilge fans. They're like 350 CFM. And so we have a number of them placed around just to circulate air, but it doesn't seem to work that well. Anyway, just try everything you can to keep the little boogers out of there.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good, folks. Again, many thanks to Dan Chiras, and we'll have his website and both his websites associated with this meeting. We'll have those as well, because there's one for books, and there probably ought to put one for the publisher in case you want to go that route.
Yeah, it's newsociety.publishers.com, I think.
Yeah. Ken can get that from you.
Okay.
All right, folks. This has been a great workshop, and we appreciate everybody coming and joining us. And hearing no other comments, I will click end for all.
Yep.
Does that sound
Have
right?
a wonderful weekend. Oh, sorry, Craig. Thank you all, everybody, for attending.
Yep.
Thank you.
Let's see you guys.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Craig.